Now, I am thrilled to welcome our next Dark Reading News Desk guest, Kaileigh McCrea. She's a privacy engineer and at Confiant, who is here to share a bit about her fascinating new research. I'm very excited to talk about the Yandex leak, how a Russian search giant uses consumer data. Thanks for being here, Kaileigh. This is such an interesting take on the Russian cybersecurity topic. And so tell me a little bit about why you took this on and what you learned.
One of the good news and the bad news about being a privacy researcher right now is that I'm one of the few people who are looking at what I'm looking at. And one advantage of that is sometimes things just fall into your lap because one researcher finds something and there's only maybe one other researcher who can confirm their findings. So this fell into my lap earlier this year because another researcher was looking at something in a different part of the code base. And so I was pulled in to confirm their findings, and I did that, and then I was just kind of like, this is interesting. I usually see the data being taken from the apps and the browsers. I don't get to see what it happens when that data reaches the company's servers and how it gets processed. And so I wanted to keep digging and see okay, so what does it look like when a fingerprint's analyzed? What does it look like when this data is collected? And so I started looking at, Crypta and audiences and Metrica, just really out of curiosity. And then I stumbled on the creepiness.
Creepiness is the right word. So let's explain to our audience exactly what the creepiness is.
So Yandex takes in a lot of data, not only through App Metrica, which is its app analytics service. It's supposed to be for product and growth teams so they can see how effective their apps are and who's using them and how. They're taking in a lot of data through that. Those SDKs, software development kits, are embedded in a lot of apps, so a lot of people don't realize that they are becoming Yandex data subjects. And they're taking in some very, very precise geolocation information on that end. And they are also taking in data points from all over Yandex's other services, including some of its biometric data and taxi data and search data and mail data, all the data.
And as a privacy researcher, maybe you can explain to us how, by comprising all of that data, what that can tell you about any individual.
Right. The data points that they seem to lean on the most are geolocation and Wi-Fi information. So a Wi-Fi SSID, for example, if you're connected to the Black Hat network right now, or your home network, that would be your Wi-Fi SSID. And it can tell you, okay, so we have this device is connected to this network, this other device also connected to this network. So these devices are associated in some way. It may be that these are devices belonging to the same person. It may be that this is a group of coworkers or a family or people who cohabit. And just tracking those associations can tell you a lot, especially when connected to all of the other data that they have. And Yandex happens to have a lot of email login data. They also happen to have a lot of phone data and other identifying information. But what's interesting is really when you track geolocation over time, you get an interesting picture of people's movements. You can track whether they have summer houses and how often they visit them.
Their Dasha.
Yes, their Dasha.
So, okay, so give us an idea. What is Yandex doing with that? Are they just sitting on it, feeding their models? Are they trying to say that this is just an ad placement effort? I mean, what are they doing with it?
So Yandex is, at least in this section of the code, pulling all of this data to analyze it and then pull out all of these characteristics about people to create very targeted ad segments for Yandex ads. And Yandex ads has a lot of facets. There's Yandex audiences, which allows really anyone who uses this product to pull from App Metrica's data, to pull from third-party data brokers. They can even upload their own data. Use all of that to create segments to target people with advertisements. And Yandex Ads also advertises across all of its products. So if you're using like a navigator and you're stuck in traffic, they'll show you an ad. And it could be based on a local business that you happen to be nearby. So most of it is ostensibly for advertisements. And I think what's really disturbing now is, okay, we've seen what Yandex can do with that data, but what we now know is that data is about to be handed to the Kremlin on a silver platter.
That was my next question. How is that going to go down?
It could go down in a number of ways. We're very much in like literally any minute we could
Really?
find out. So I think there was on the 8th, Medusa published the story that the prime minister signed an order that as of September 1st, all taxi services in the country are going to be required to share their taxi data, all of the data connected with it, 24/7 with the FSB. And that includes Yandex. Yandex has a taxi service, and it's not just in Russia. Yandex has a taxi service that's international, including in Israel and other countries. And that data is commingled. They can't really separate out the international and Russia data, so everybody's data, who's ever used a Yandex taxi app, that is now going directly to the FSB. And Yandex itself is up for sale because its parent company in the Netherlands is really tired of getting sanctioned.
Makes sense.
So they are trying to offload the Russian assets. Putin has to approve anyone they sell it to, so it's going to go to an oligarch of his choosing. But it's hard to get Yandex investors to agree to someone because they really have to narrow it down to an oligarch who hasn't been sanctioned yet.
And that's a pretty short list, I would
That is
imagine.
an extremely short list.
Two, maybe. I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's really freaky. So we are now fully into the KGB watching everybody's moves. Anybody that's sort of in this data set.
Yes.
So, what what do we do about that? I mean, first of all, it seems like a crazy security issue how hard could it be for somebody to go in and lift all that data and steal it and use it against the Kremlin for their purposes? How difficult would it be for that data to be corrupted? Like, it just, that huge of a data set with that much power behind it has to be on a target somewhere, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think you brought up like probably the most important point of all of this is, they built this tool without, I think, really considering from an ethical lens how it could be exploited. And there are so many people who could exploit it that this could be hacked. It's a very obvious target for hacking. The government can seize it as they're attempting to do now. The government could effectively nationalize it, which is a very real possibility. It really could be used by anyone who gets access to it in any way. And one thing Yandex keeps saying about this is like, well, it's so we can create more personalized ads so that we can target people
We've
better.
heard that old song and dance.
Right? That is the very typical line for ad tech. And it's like, A, I think that's pretty out of step with what consumers actually want and expect and what they're willing to sacrifice to get that. And B, is that worth it? Is that really worth it? We're creating something not just in Yandex, but across all of ad tech, which is touching everything these days.
And
that can easily be
biometric
exploited.
Aspect is sort of the cherry on the cake. Yeah.
Yes, that their Alice Smart Assistant it's going directly into crypto.
Okay, so what do we do? What do we do about the
What do we do about it? Yes, that is also the question, and that is sort of the tricky thing. There isn't an easy answer. It's almost like for many of us who've been on the internet for more than a month, which is everybody really, for a lot of us, it feels like that ship has sailed, hasn't it?
That's it does.
Like-
And it seems like from a consumer perspective, everybody's, they've got it all. I mean, what can I do?
Yeah, and the thing is, like, okay, you can try to not use Yandex services. If you're in Russia or Eastern Europe, that's really hard.
Yeah.
And then, if you are in the US, there's still a lot of ad tech on, especially any of the platforms that we all use. Ad tech is everywhere, and that data set is vulnerable to exactly those same things globally. And honestly, there just isn't any escaping it. I think this is one of those things where awareness and a larger movement against this as a whole, because it's just sort of been taken out of consumers' hands.
I really hope that with this research and others, we will have more than a couple of researchers looking at this. This seems like a monumental task.
We need a lot more than a couple of researchers looking at this.
Wow. Well, thank you for that very stark. I knew this was going to be a great interview. I didn't know I would be a little nauseous after, but here we are. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.